I thought I was just booking a unique stay at the old jail inn, but what I got was a crash course in its terrifying, unwritten rules. Trust me, you don't want to break these. From spectral encounters to unsettling echoes, my relaxing getaway turned into a suspenseful fight for. Well, you'll have to watch to find out. My name is Elena Blackwood, and I needed this job more than I needed my sanity. That should have been my first red flag. When you're desperate enough to take a night shift position at a converted 19th century jail without asking too many questions, you're already walking into trouble with your eyes wide shut. The old jail squats on the outskirts of Millbrook, Pennsylvania, like a Gothic tumor against the autumn sky. Its red brick facade, topped with rusted iron spikes and barred windows, makes no attempt to disguise its grim history. The booking website calls it authentically atmospheric and a unique historical experience. What they don't mention is how the shadows seem to move independently of any light source, or how the temperature drops 10 degrees the moment you cross the threshold. I arrived for my interview on a Tuesday evening in October, when the dying light cast everything in shades of amber and blood. The parking lot was nearly empty except for a few scattered cars and a maintenance van with Pennsylvania plates. The building's entrance had been modernized with glass doors and brass fixtures, but the original iron gates still flanked the entrance like silent sentinels. Inside, the lobby attempted cheerful hospitality with warm lighting and leather furniture, but the original stone walls and vaulted ceilings betrayed its sinister origins. Behind a reception desk hung a large oil painting of the inn's first warden, Cornelius Thorne, whose pale eyes seemed to track movement across the room. A brass plaque beneath read, "In memory of those who found redemption within these walls, 1847 to 1923. The manager, Patricia Voss, emerged from a back office with the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. She was a woman in her 50s with silver hair pulled into a severe bun and clothes that suggested she took her position very seriously. Her handshake was firm, almost aggressive, and her fingers were ice-cold despite the warmth of the lobby. "Elena, I presume. Punctual. I like that." Her voice carried the faint trace of a German accent. "We value punctuality here at the old jail inn. Time, you see, has a different meaning within these walls." She led me through the lobby to a small conference room that had obviously been converted from one of the original holding cells. The stone walls still bore scratches and stains that no amount of renovation could completely erase. Patricia sat across from me at a round table that seemed ridiculously modern against the medieval backdrop. "The night shift position is demanding," she began, shuffling through papers without looking at me. "Our guests expect impeccable service, but they also expect discretion. Many of our visitors come here seeking experiences they cannot find elsewhere. Your job is to facilitate those experiences, not question them." I nodded, trying to appear professional while suppressing the urge to ask what exactly she meant by experiences. The job posting had been vague: night desk clerk, assist guests, maintain property security, standard hotel work, or so I thought. "The pay is excellent for this area," Patricia continued, sliding a folder across the table. $28 an hour, full benefits, and a signing bonus of $5,000. My eyebrows shot up. That was nearly double what most night clerks made, even in the city. Either this place was incredibly generous, or there was a catch. Given the setting, I suspected the latter. "The position does come with certain requirements," she said, her pale fingers drumming against the table. "Nothing unreasonable, mind you. Simply protocols that ensure the comfort and safety of our guests and our staff." She opened the folder and withdrew a single sheet of paper, my employment contract. It was surprisingly brief for such a generous offer, but one clause near the bottom caught my attention. "Employee agrees to follow all established protocols and procedures, both written and customary, as directed by management or as discovered through on-site experience. Discovered through on-site experience? I questioned. Patricia's smile faltered for just a moment. The old jail has been operating continuously since 1923, when it was converted from a functioning penitentiary. Over the decades, we've developed certain traditions, protocols that ensure smooth operation. You'll learn them naturally as you work. Consider it on-the-job training. Something in her tone made my skin crawl, but the signing bonus was more money than I'd seen in years. My student loans weren't going to pay themselves, and my previous job at the downtown hotel had ended badly when a chain decided to restructure their workforce. When would I start? I heard myself asking. Tonight, if you're amenable, I'll be training you personally for the first week. She produced a pen from her jacket pocket. The night shift runs from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. You'll have the entire building to yourself most nights, save for our guests and the occasional maintenance issue. I signed the contract, and Patricia's smile returned in full force. She stood and extended her hand again, her grip somehow even colder than before. Welcome to the old jail and family, Elena. I think you'll find working here quite educational. She led me back to the lobby and behind the reception desk, where she began showing me the computer system, phone protocols, and guest services. Everything seemed normal enough. Check-ins, check-outs, room service requests, basic hospitality procedures. But as the evening progressed and the last day shift employee departed, I began to notice the subtleties Patricia had mentioned. The guest book, leather-bound and clearly antique, contained entries that made my blood run cold. Guest after guest had written variations of the same phrases. Thank you for teaching me the rules. I understand now what must be done. The voices are quieter when I listen. Patricia, I called softly, but she had disappeared into the back office again. When she returned, she was carrying a small brass handbell and a manila envelope. A few final items, she said, placing both on the desk. This bell is never to be rung during night hours. Never. It summons things that are better left undisturbed. Her eyes met mine with an intensity that made my stomach lurch. The envelope contains emergency contact numbers, maintenance, security, the local authorities. Though I doubt you'll need them if you follow the protocols. What protocols exactly? I asked, but Patricia was already walking toward the exit. You'll learn, dear. Ian has a way of teaching those who are willing to listen. She paused at the door, her silhouette framed against the parking lot lights. Elena, if you hear your name called during the night hours, and you cannot see who is calling, don't answer. Not until sunrise. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving me alone in the lobby with nothing but the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the steady tick of an antique grandfather clock. I looked around the empty space, noting for the first time how many dark corners and shadowed alcoves surrounded the reception area. The building felt vast and hollow, like standing inside the ribcage of some enormous beast. I settled behind the desk and tried to focus on the computer training materials Patricia had left, but my attention kept drifting to that brass bell. It sat innocently beside the phone, polished and gleaming, but something about it made my skin crawl. What could be so dangerous about ringing a bell? The first guest arrived at 11:30 p.m., a middle-aged man with nervous eyes and an expensive leather suitcase. He approached the desk with the cautious steps of someone entering a church or a morgue. Reservation for Thompson, he said quietly. Room 237. I found his information in the system and prepared his key card, but as I handed it over, he leaned across the desk conspiratorially. First time working here, he whispered. Yes, sir. Is there anything specific I should know? His eyes darted toward the staircase leading to the upper floors, then back to me. Listen to the building, he said urgently. It talks to those who pay attention. And whatever you do, don't go to the third floor between midnight and 3 a.m. The cells up there, some of them are still occupied. Before I could ask what he meant, he took his key and hurried toward the elevator. leaving me alone with questions that I was beginning to suspect had very uncomfortable answers. The grandfather clock chimed midnight, and somewhere in the walls around me, I could have sworn I heard the faint sound of chains rattling in response. The night stretched ahead of me like a dark tunnel with no visible end. After Thompson disappeared upstairs with his cryptic warnings, the lobby fell into an unnatural quiet that seemed to press against my eardrums. I tried to distract myself with paperwork, but every small sound, the building settling, the air conditioning cycling, the distant hum of the ice machine, made me jump. At 12:47 a.m., I discovered the first rule. I was organizing the supply closet behind the desk when I noticed a handwritten note tucked behind a box of keycards. The paper was yellowed and brittle, written in faded blue ink. Rule number 1. Never leave the desk unattended between midnight and 3 a.m. They wait for the desk to be empty. My blood turned to ice water. Who were they? And why hadn't Patricia mentioned this during training? I crumpled the note and shoved it into my pocket, but my hands were shaking now. The building suddenly felt much larger and more threatening, full of dark corners and unseen watchers. I pulled my chair closer to the computer and tried to focus on the reservation system, but the silence was becoming oppressive. That's when I noticed the sounds weren't really silent at all. There was something underneath the quiet, a low murmur like distant conversation. I strained to listen, but couldn't make out any words. At 1:15 a.m., a woman emerged from the elevator. She was elderly, probably in her 70s, with wild gray hair and clothes that looked like they belonged in a different decade. She moved with the careful, measured steps of someone navigating in the dark. "Excuse me, dear," she called softly as she approached the desk. "I'm in room 312, and I'm having trouble with the heat." I checked the system. No one was registered in room 312. In fact, according to the floor plan, room 312 was marked as maintenance storage. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I don't show anyone registered in that room. Could there be a mistake with the number?" Her pale eyes fixed on mine with an intensity that made my spine crawl. "Oh, there's no mistake, dear. I've been in 312 for quite some time now. Could you send maintenance up? The cold is just terrible tonight." She turned and walked back toward the elevator with that same measured pace. But when the elevator doors opened, the car was empty. She stepped inside, the doors closed, and the display showed the elevator ascending to the third floor. But according to the building directory, the third floor had been sealed off for renovations 3 years ago. I grabbed the phone and dialed the maintenance number Patricia had left, but it went straight to voicemail. My hands were trembling as I hung up and tried to process what had just happened. There was no way that woman could have been a registered guest, but she'd spoken to me, interacted with the elevator, behaved like any other customer with a simple maintenance request. The grandfather clock chimed 1:30, and the murmuring sounds in the walls grew louder. I was about to call Patricia's emergency number when I heard my name. Elena. The voice was soft, feminine, and seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I looked around the empty lobby, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Elena, come here." It was coming from a hallway that led to the restaurant and conference rooms, areas that should have been locked and empty at this hour. I remembered Patricia's warning about not answering when my name was called, but the voice was so gentle, so inviting. It sounded like my mother calling me in for dinner when I was a child. "Elena, we're waiting for you." I gripped the edge of the desk and forced myself to remain seated. The voice called 3 more times, each iteration more plaintive and desperate, before finally fading into silence. But now the murmuring in the walls had stopped too, replaced by something worse. The sound of footsteps on the floor above. Slow, deliberate footsteps, pacing back and forth in a steady rhythm. I pulled up the reservation system and checked the third floor. According to the records, every room on that floor was marked out of order, renovation. But someone was definitely walking around up there, and the footsteps were directly above my head. That's when I found the second note. This one was taped to the underside of the desk drawer, written in a different handwriting, more recent, less faded. Rule number 2. When you hear footsteps on the third floor, count them. If you count more than 47 steps, call maintenance immediately and tell them the procession has begun. Do not go investigate yourself. I grabbed a pen and paper, my hands still shaking, and began counting the footsteps above. 1, 2, 3. The steps were methodical, measured, like someone pacing a small cell. 10, 11, 12. At step 20, a second set of footsteps joined the first. At step 30, there were 3 distinct patterns of movement. By step 40, it sounded like a dozen people were walking in formation above my head, their footfalls creating a rhythmic drumbeat that echoed through the entire building. I could feel the vibrations in the desk, in my chair, in my chest. 45, 46, 47. A lunge for the phone and dial maintenance. My fingers barely able to hit the right numbers. Maintenance. This is Rodriguez. This is Elena at the front desk. The procession has begun. Silence on the other end. Then a sharp intake of breath. Jesus. Okay, stay exactly where you are. Don't move from that desk. Don't go upstairs. Don't answer any doors or phones except mine. I'll be there in 10 minutes. The line went dead, and the footsteps continued. 48, 49, 50. At 60 steps, the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise. I sat frozen behind the desk, every nerve in my body screaming, waiting for something terrible to happen. The grandfather clock ticked loudly in the corner, marking time with the persistence of a funeral drum. Rodriguez arrived in 8 minutes, bursting through the front door with a toolbox in one hand and what looked like a small silver cross in the other. He was a compact man in his 50s with graying hair and the weathered hands of someone who'd spent decades fixing things. "You okay?" he asked, scanning the lobby as if looking for intruders. "I think so. What was that? What's the procession?" He set down his toolbox and wiped sweat from his forehead despite the cool air. Something that happens when a building gets restless, usually during the anniversary weeks. He paused and looked directly at me. "You don't know about the anniversary, do you?" I shook my head. October 31st, 1923. The last execution at the old penitentiary before it was converted. 12 inmates were scheduled to hang, but something went wrong during the night. They found all 12 dead in their cells the next morning. No signs of violence, no explanation. Official report said it was some kind of gas leak, but the guards who found them, well, most of them quit within the week. Those who stayed started talking about seeing the dead men walking their cells, night after night, pacing the same pattern they'd walked while alive. My mouth went dry, and that's what I heard. That's what you counted. He picked up his toolbox and started toward the elevator. "I need to check the third floor, make sure the seals are still intact. The rooms up there are supposed to stay locked, but sometimes," he shrugged, "sometimes dead men don't respect locked doors." "Wait," I called after him. "How many rules are there? How many things am I supposed to know that nobody told me?" Rodriguez stopped and turned back to me, his expression grim. "Honestly, I've been working here 15 years, and I'm still learning them. But here's the thing about the old jail inn. It teaches you what you need to know when you need to know it. Your job isn't to know everything up front. Your job is to pay attention and follow the rules when they reveal themselves." He disappeared into the elevator, leaving me alone again with my racing heart and a growing list of questions. I pulled out my phone and did a quick internet search for Old Jail in Pennsylvania Deaths 1923. What I found made my blood freeze. 12 men had indeed died on the night before the scheduled execution, but the newspaper archives contained details that Rodriguez hadn't mentioned. The guards who found the bodies reported that all 12 inmates were discovered standing upright in their cells, facing the doors, their eyes wide open. The cell doors had been unlocked from the inside, though the keys remained with the guards. And in each cell, scratched into the stone walls, were the same words repeated over and over. The rules must be followed. I was still reading when Rodriguez returned 20 minutes later. His face was pale, and I noticed his hand were trembling slightly as he packed his tools. "Everything secure up there?" I asked. "For now." He paused at the desk and looked at me seriously. "Elena, can I give you some advice? This job pays well because it's dangerous. Not physically dangerous, usually, but other kinds of dangerous. The kind that gets into your head and doesn't leave. If you're smart, you'll quit after tonight and find work somewhere normal. And if I'm not smart, then you'll learn the rules, follow them exactly, and maybe, you'll last long enough to train your replacement." He headed for the door, then stopped. "Oh, and Elena, that brass bell on the desk. If you hear it ring on its own, that means someone on the third floor is trying to communicate. Whatever you do, don't ring it back. Some conversations are better left unfinished." The door closed behind him, and I was alone again in the lobby. The grandfather clock showed 2:47 a.m., just over an hour until the supposed danger period ended. I could make it that long. I had to make it that long. But as I settled back into my chair, I noticed something that made my heart skip. The brass bell was no longer sitting beside the phone where Patricia had left it. It was now positioned directly in front of me, as if someone had carefully moved it while I wasn't looking. And in the silence of the empty lobby, I could swear I heard the faint echo of footsteps beginning again on the floor above. The bell sat before me like a sleeping serpent, its brass surface reflecting the lobby's amber lighting in twisted, unnatural patterns. I hadn't touched it, hadn't seen anyone else approach the desk. Yet there it was, moved at least 6 inches from its original position. My hands hovered over the keyboard as I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. But the cold metal seemed to radiate an almost magnetic pull. At exactly 3 a.m., the footsteps above stopped. The silence that followed felt different from before. Not empty, but expectant, as if the building itself was holding its breath. The grandfather clock's chiming seemed to echo longer than usual, each note hanging in the air before dissolving into the darkness. That's when I found the third rule. It was written on the back of a room service menu, tucked between the desk blotter and the phone book. Rule number 3. Every night at 3:15 a.m., place one fresh red apple on the windowsill of the library. If the apple is gone by morning, the building is satisfied. If it remains, prepare for consequences. Library key is in the third drawer, left side. I checked my watch. 3:07 a.m. 8 minutes to find the library, locate the right windowsill, and place an apple one didn't have. My heart rate spiked as I frantically searched the desk drawers. The third drawer on the left contained a promised key, along with a small basket holding 3 perfect red apples that definitely hadn't been there earlier. The library was located down a narrow hallway past the restaurant, behind a heavy oak door marked with a small brass plate. The key turned easily, as if it had been recently oiled, and the door swung open to reveal a room that shouldn't have existed. The space was enormous, far larger than the building's exterior dimensions could accommodate. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves stretched into shadows that seemed to move independently of my flashlight beam. Ancient volumes bound in leather and metal filled every available space, their titles written in languages I didn't recognize. The air smelled of parchment, dust, and something else, something organic and unpleasant, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. At the far end of the room, a tall arched window looked out onto the parking lot, or at least it should have. Instead, the glass showed a view I'd never seen before, a courtyard filled with gallows, where shadowy figures moved between the wooden structures in endless, silent dance. I approached the window cautiously, the apple clutched in my sweating palm. The windowsill was wide and made of the same dark stone as the building's original walls. Strange symbols had been carved into the stone. Some looked like letters, Others resembled the scratches of desperate fingernails. 3:14 a.m. I placed the apple on the sill and stepped back, watching through the glass as the phantom figures in the courtyard suddenly stopped their movement and turned to stare directly at me. Their faces were pale ovals in the darkness, featureless except for dark hollows where their eyes should be. 3:15 a.m. The apple began to glow with a soft, sickly light. One of the figures in the courtyard raised its hand, a gesture that might have been greeting or warning, and then they all resumed their eternal dance around the gallows. I backed away from the window, my skin crawling with the certainty that I was being watched by unseen eyes. The library door slammed shut behind me as I fled back to the lobby. My hands were still shaking as I settled behind the desk, trying to process what I'd seen. The building's layout made no sense. The windows showed impossible views, and I was apparently feeding apples to invisible entities as part of my job responsibilities. None of this had been in the employee handbook. At 4:30 a.m., my first guest complaint arrived. A young man emerged from the elevator, probably in his late 20s, with a pale, drawn look of someone who hadn't slept well. His name tag read, "Conference Attendee, Mitchell," and he approached the desk with the careful movements of someone trying not to make noise. "Excuse me," he whispered. "I'm in room 201, and there's something wrong with the mirror in my bathroom." I pulled up his registration. Dr. James Mitchell, staying 3 nights for some kind of medical conference. Nothing unusual in his file. "What seems to be the problem, Dr. Mitchell?" "It's showing the wrong reflection." He paused, as if trying to find the right words. "I look in the mirror, and I see myself, but older, much older, and the reflection is moving independently, doing things I'm not doing." My blood went cold. "What kind of things?" "Writing. The reflection is writing something on the mirror from the inside, but I can't read it from my side. And the handwriting." He shuddered. "It looks like mine, but it's shaky, like an old man's handwriting." I started to reach for the phone to call maintenance, but Dr. Mitchell grabbed my wrist. "Don't call anyone," he said urgently. "I've been coming here for 3 years. I know how this place works. There are rules about the mirrors, aren't there? Tell me what I'm supposed to do." I stared at him, my mind racing. If he'd been coming here for 3 years, he knew more about this place than I did. But he was asking me about rules I'd never heard of, expecting me to provide answers I didn't have. I'm new," I admitted. "This is my first night." His face went white. "Oh God, they put a newbie on during anniversary week." He released my wrist and began pacing in front of the desk. Okay. Think, Mitchell. The mirror rule. What was the mirror rule?" He stopped pacing and looked at me with desperate intensity. "Check the desk. There has to be a note, a guideline, something. They always leave instructions for the night staff." I began frantically searching drawers, lifting papers, checking under the desk blotter. Finally, taped to the inside of the cash drawer, I found it. Rule number 4. Guest mirrors may show alternate timelines or future selves during anniversary week. If a guest complains about mirror irregularities, give them the black cloth from the emergency kit. Instruct them to cover the mirror completely, and do not remove the cloth until checkout. Under no circumstances should anyone attempt to communicate with mirror reflections. I retrieved the emergency kit from under the desk, a small metal box I hadn't noticed before. Inside, along with basic first aid supplies, was a folded square of black fabric that felt strangely heavy in my hands. "Here," I said, handing Dr. Mitchell the cloth. "You need to cover the mirror completely, and don't try to communicate with whatever you see in there." He took the fabric gratefully, but his hands were shaking. "What happens if I do try to communicate?" I looked down at the rule again and noticed there was more writing on the back, in a different hand. Mirror reflections showing future selves or warnings. They show what happens to those who break the rules. The writing on the glass is always the same message. Follow the rules or become like me. "You don't want to know," I told him. Dr. Mitchell nodded and headed back toward the elevator, clutching the black cloth like a lifeline. As the elevator doors closed behind him, I noticed something that made my stomach lurch. The brass bell on the desk was glowing faintly, pulsing like a slow heartbeat. 5:15 a.m. Less than an hour until sunrise, until my shift ended, until I could escape this nightmare and pretend it had all been some kind of stress-induced hallucination. But as I watched the bell's rhythmic pulsing, I realized something that chilled me to the bone. The pulsing matched the rhythm of the footsteps I'd counted earlier. 47 pulses of light, then a pause. Then it began again. I grabbed my phone and called Rodriguez's emergency number. "What now?" he answered on the first ring, as if he'd been expecting my call. "The bell. It's glowing and pulsing. 47 pulses, just like the footsteps." Silence on the other end, then a sharp curse. "Listen to me very carefully, Elena. Do not touch that bell. Do not ring it. Do not move it. Don't even breathe on it. The pulsing means they're trying to establish contact." Who's trying to establish contact? The 12. The ones who died in 1923. When they get restless during anniversary week, they sometimes try to communicate with the living. The bell is their telephone, I guess you could say. If you ring it back, you'll be answering their call. And what happens if I answer? Another pause. Nobody knows. Everyone who's ever rung that bell back has. Well, let's just say they didn't finish their shift. The bell pulsed brighter, and I could swear I heard something else now. A faint whisper coming from the brass itself. Too quiet to make out the words, but urgent in tone. "Rodriguez, what am I supposed to do? It's getting brighter. Stay calm. Keep your distance. And whatever you do, don't let curiosity get the better of you. Sunrise is in 40 minutes. You can make it that long." But as I hung up the phone, I realized making it to sunrise might be more difficult than Rodriguez thought. Because standing in the hallway that led to the restaurant, barely visible in the shadows, was the elderly woman from room 312. She was holding something in her hands, something that glinted in the amber light of the lobby. A second brass bell, identical to the one on my desk. And as I watched in horror, she raised it above her head and rang it 3 times. The bell on my desk responded immediately, chiming in perfect harmony with hers. And suddenly the lobby was filled with the sound of doors opening throughout the building. Doors that shouldn't exist. Doors that led to places that had been sealed for decades. The procession was about to begin again. But this time, they weren't content to remain on the 3rd floor. The harmonized chiming of the 2 bells reverberated through my bones like a tuning fork struck against my skeleton. The elderly woman in the hallway smiled, a ghastly expression that split her face from ear to ear, before turning and walking back into the shadows with her brass bell clutched against her chest. All around me, the building came alive with sounds that should have been impossible. Doors creaked open on floors that were supposed to be empty. Footsteps echoed from multiple directions at once. The elevator began moving between floors without being called, its machinery grinding and whining as if struggling under an enormous weight. 5:23 a.m. 37 minutes until sunrise. The bell on my desk had stopped pulsing and now glowed with a steady, malevolent light. As I stared at it, transfixed by its hypnotic gleam, words began to appear on its surface, scratched into the brass, as if by invisible fingernails. "Come to US, Elena. Learn the final rule." My irrational mind screamed at me to stay behind the desk, to follow Rodriguez's warning, to wait for sunrise like any sensible person would do. But something deeper and more primal was pulling me toward that bell, toward the mysteries hidden in this converted prison. I'd already learned that the old jail and operated by its own twisted logic, and fighting that logic seemed more dangerous than embracing it. I stood up slowly, my legs trembling, and reached for the bell. The moment my fingers made contact with the brass, the world exploded into chaos. The lobby dissolved around me like smoke, replaced by a vision of the building as it had been in 1923. Gas lamps flickered along stone corridors lined with iron-barred cells. The air was thick with the stench of unwashed bodies, fear, and something else, the metallic taste of approaching death. I was no longer Elena Blackwood, night clerk at a boutique hotel. I was a witness to something that had happened a century ago, experiencing it as if I stood in that hallway on the night 12 condemned men learned the rules that would follow them beyond death. Warden Cornelius Thorne, the man from the portrait in the lobby, walked slowly down the corridor, his leather boots echoing against the stone floor. He was younger than in his painting, probably in his 40s, with steel-gray hair and eyes like winter ice. In his hands, he carried a brass bell identical to the ones I'd seen. "Gentlemen," his voice boomed through the cell block, "tomorrow you pay society's debt. But tonight, you have one final opportunity to achieve understanding." The 12 condemned men pressed against the bars of their cells, their faces gaunt with hunger and fear. I recognized some of them from old newspaper photographs I'd seen online. Murderers, thieves, men who'd committed crimes that had shocked the conservative Pennsylvania community of the 1920s. "The rules of this institution extend beyond the grave," Thorne continued, his voice taking on an almost hypnotic quality. "Death is not an escape from justice, merely a transition to a different form of service. Those who learn the rules may find their punishment transformed." He stopped in front of the first cell, where a young man with desperate eyes gripped the bars with white knuckles. "What rules?" the prisoner gasped. "What are you talking about?" Thorne smiled, and it was the same predatory expression I'd seen on Patricia Voss's face. "The rules that govern this place, Mr. Henderson. The rules that determine whether you rest in peace or remain to serve as a warning to others." He rang the bell 3 times, and the sound seemed to penetrate not just the air, but reality itself. The stone walls shimmered, and for a moment I could see through them to the modern lobby where my body stood frozen, one hand still gripping a brass bell. "Rule 1, Thorne announced. "Never abandon your post during the hours of judgment, midnight to 3 a.m. Those who desert their duties in life are condemned to walk them in death." The prisoners began to murmur among themselves, some praying, others cursing, but all listening with the intensity of men who sense their eternal fate hanging in the balance. "Rule 2, Thorne continued, moving to the second cell. "When the procession begins, count the steps. When the count reaches 47, the number of men who have died within these walls, call for assistance. The living must help contain the dead. Rule 3, feed the hunger. Every night, place an offering on a library windowsill. The dead must be acknowledged, or they grow restless and seek acknowledgement themselves." He rang the bell again, and the sound grew stronger, more insistent. Several of the prisoners had begun to weep. "Rule 4, cover the mirrors. The glass shows truth, and truth can drive the living mad. What you see in the reflection is what awaits you if you fail to follow the rules." Thorne had reached the center of the corridor now, directly opposite the cell of the eldest prisoner, a gray-haired man who watched the warden with defiant eyes despite his chains. "And now," Thorne said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "the final rule, the rule that binds all others together." He raised the bell high above his head, and the brass began to glow with the same sickly light I'd seen in the modern lobby. The prisoners fell silent, even their breathing seeming to stop as they waited for his words. "Rule 5, when the bell calls, you must answer, whether in life or death, whether willing or not. You must come when summoned. This is the covenant of the old jail, service beyond the grave, vigilance beyond death." The bell rang one final time, and the sound shattered something fundamental in the fabric of reality. The prisoners began to scream, not in pain but in terror, as they realized what Thorne had done. He hadn't just told them the rules. He bound them to those rules for eternity. One by one, The condemned men began to change. Their bodies grew translucent, their eyes became hollow voids, and their voices faded to whispers. They were dying without dying, transforming into the guardians and servants that would haunt the old jail inn for the next century. "You see," Thorne said, addressing their ghostly forms, "execution was never the true punishment. The true punishment is service, eternal, unwavering service to ensure that the rules are followed by all who enter these walls." The vision began to fade, the stone corridors dissolving back into the familiar lobby. But Thorne's voice echoed across time with one final revelation. "And when the living fail to follow the rules, when they break the covenant, they join the ranks of the eternal servants. Welcome to your new position, Miss Blackwood." I snapped back to the present, gasping as if I'd been underwater. The brass bell was still in my hand, but it was no longer glowing. Instead, it felt ice cold against my palm, so cold it almost burned. The lobby was empty and silent, but I could feel eyes watching me from every shadow. 5:41 a.m., 19 minutes until sunrise. I tried to set the bell down, but it wouldn't leave my hand. My fingers seemed fused to the brass, and when I looked down, I could see my skin growing pale and translucent where it touched the metal. "No," I whispered, pulling desperately at the bell. "No, I didn't break any rules. I followed them. I did everything right." But even as I spoke, I realized a horrible truth. I had broken a rule, the most important one. Rodriguez had warned me not to touch the bell, not to let curiosity get the better of me. But I'd done exactly that. I'd picked it up, allowed it to show me the vision, accepted the knowledge that came with it. Knowledge always came with a price at the old jail inn. My legs were growing numb, and when I looked down, I could see through them to the carpet below. The transformation was accelerating. Soon I would join the 12, walking the halls in eternal service to Thorne's twisted covenant. But then I remembered something, a detail from the vision that might be my salvation. "When the bell calls, you must answer," Thorne had said. But he'd also said something else. The living must help contain the dead. I wasn't dead yet. Transformed, yes, but still technically alive. And if I was alive, then perhaps I could help contain what was happening to me. With tremendous effort, I forced my translucent legs to move, carrying me toward the emergency kit under the desk. My fingers passed through the first few items, but on the fourth try, I managed to grasp the black cloth that Dr. Mitchell had used to cover his mirror. The cloth felt solid in my ghostly hands, heavy with some kind of protective power. I wrapped it around the bell, and immediately felt the cold grip on my hand begin to loosen. My skin slowly regained its normal color and opacity. But I wasn't free yet. The cloth had stopped the transformation, but I could feel the bell's influence still trying to claim me. I needed to complete the ritual, to finish what had been started. Following an instinct I couldn't explain, I carried the wrapped bell to the library. The room looked different now, smaller, more normal, with ordinary books instead of the ancient tomes I'd seen earlier. The window showed the regular parking lot, gray with approaching dawn. I placed the cloth-wrapped bell on the windowsill where I'd left the apple hours earlier. The apple was gone, but in its place was a single black key I'd never seen before. As I picked up the key, words appeared on the window glass, written in condensation as if someone on the other side was breathing against it. "You have learned the rules. Now you must choose. Serve willingly and retain your humanity, or serve unwillingly and lose yourself forever." The black key opens room 237. Bring it to Thompson before sunrise. 5:52 a.m. 8 minutes. I ran through the lobby and up the stairs, my heart pounding as I climbed to the second floor. Room 237 was at the end of the hallway, and I could see lights seeping from under the door. I knocked softly. "Mr. Thompson, it's Elena from the front desk. I have something for you." The door opened immediately, as if he'd been waiting for me. Thompson looked tired but not surprised to see me standing there with a black key in my trembling hand. "So you learned the final rule," he said quietly. "I was hoping you wouldn't, but..." He shrugged. "Being chooses who it chooses. What does this key open?" "The truth." He took the key and stepped aside, gesturing for me to enter his room. "Come in. We need to talk before sunrise." Thompson's room was ordinary except for one detail. A large oil painting hanging above the bed. It showed the same scene I'd witnessed in my vision. Warden Thorne standing in the corridor, brass bell raised high, as 12 prisoners transformed into eternal servants. "I was the warden's assistant," Thompson said, following my gaze. "In 1923, I helped him develop the rules, helped him bind those 12 souls to this place. And when he died in 1947, I took over his responsibilities." My mouth fell open. "You've been here for a century." Time moves differently for those of us who serve willingly. We age slowly, retain our humanity, but we can never leave. We're the wardens of the dead, the ones who ensure the rules are followed. He looked at me with something that might have been pity. "And now, you're being offered the same choice Thorne offered me all those years ago." "What choice?" "Serve willingly as a living guardian, or join the 12 as a restless spirit. The inn needs someone young, someone who can work the night shift for the next few decades while I finally rest." Sunlight was beginning to creep through the windows, painting the walls gold and orange. In the distance, I could hear the faint sound of the day's shift arriving for work. "If I refuse..." Thompson's expression darkened. "Then you'll spend eternity walking the 3rd floor, counting steps and ringing bells for whoever comes after you." Ben doesn't like to let go of those who've learned all the rules. I looked at the painting again, at the faces of the 12 condemned men, and realized I was looking at my potential future. But I was also looking at something else, a choice that none of them had been given. "If I serve willingly," I asked slowly, "do I get to keep training new night clerks? Do I get to help them survive their first week?" Thompson smiled, and for the first time since I'd met him, he looked genuinely pleased. "That's exactly what you do. Guide them, teach them, help them learn the rules before the rules claim them." The sun crested the horizon, sending golden light streaming through the windows. My shift was over, but I realized in a way my real job was just beginning. "I accept," I said, and meant it. Thompson handed me a second black key, this one warm to the touch instead of cold. "Welcome to management, Elena. Your new office is room 312. 6 months have passed since that October morning when I became the newest guardian of the old jail inn, and I've learned that managing the supernatural is surprisingly similar to managing any other hospitality business. It's all about clear expectations, consistent service, and never letting the customer see you sweat. My office in room 312 overlooks the same courtyard I'd seen through the library window on my first night, though now I understand what I'm looking at. The gallows are still there, ghostly and translucent in daylight, but solid as steel once darkness falls. The figures I'd seen dancing between the wooden structures aren't random spirits. They're the guards and executioners who worked here during the prison years, doomed to reenact their duties until someone releases them from service. That someone, I've discovered, is me. Thompson stayed for 3 weeks to train me in my new responsibilities, and I have to admit, the transition from night clerk to supernatural warden wasn't as dramatic as I'd expected. Most of my duties are administrative, maintaining the rules, training new staff, and ensuring that our permanent residents remain manageable. The 12 condemned men are surprisingly cooperative once you understand their limitations. They can't leave the 3rd floor between midnight and 3 a.m. They must answer when a brass bell calls them, and they're compelled to count their steps in sets of 47. But during the day, they're free to move throughout the building, and several of them have proven quite helpful with maintenance issues. Henderson, the young man from Cell 1, has an aptitude for electrical work that extends into the supernatural realm. When the lights flicker or the elevators malfunction, it's usually because he's trying to fix something more complex than the living maintenance staff can handle. I've learned to leave coffee and donuts outside his old cell as payment for his services. Dr. Mitchell still comes for his annual conference, and he's become something of a regular consultant on the psychological aspects of our operation. The mirror in his room continues to show his future self, but now that he understands the rules, he finds the experience more educational than terrifying. His future self has been writing detailed instructions for handling various supernatural crises, creating what Mitchell calls a temporal maintenance manual. The most challenging aspect of my new position isn't managing the dead, it's training the living. I've hired and trained 17 night clerks in 6 months. 12 of them quit after the first week. 3 more made it through their first month before deciding the job wasn't for them, and 2 simply disappeared without notice. I don't ask what happened to those last 2. Some questions are better left unanswered in my line of work. But today marks a special occasion. Tonight, I'm training someone who might actually have what it takes to survive the old jail inn. Her name is Carmen Rodriguez. No relation to the maintenance supervisor who helped me survive my first night. She's 26, has a master's degree in hospitality management, and more importantly, she spent the last 3 years working as a night auditor at a supposedly haunted hotel in Savannah. When I interviewed her over the phone, she didn't even blink when I mentioned that our establishment had unique atmospheric challenges. Unique how? She'd asked. Let's just say our guests have very specific expectations, and some of them have been staying with us longer than our usual demographics would suggest. Ghosts, she'd said matter-of-factly. How many are we talking about? And are they hostile or just restless? I hired her on the spot. Carmen arrives at 9:45 p.m. on a cold March evening, 15 minutes early for her first shift. She's a small woman with dark hair, pulled into a practical ponytail, and the kind of steady gaze that suggests she's seen enough strange things to take them in stride. Her handshake is firm and warm, a good sign, since our permanent residents tend to make living people cold. So, she says, settling behind a reception desk as I show her the computer system, what's the weirdest thing that happens here on an average night? I consider the question seriously. Define weird. Are we talking about supernatural weird, logistically weird, or emotionally weird? Start with supernatural and work your way up. I pull out the brass bell, the same one that started my journey 6 months ago, and set on the desk between us. This is our communication system with the 3rd floor residents. They use it to request assistance or report problems. When it glows, someone upstairs needs help. When it chimes on its own, they're trying to warn us about something. And when it rings 47 times in rapid succession, we evacuate the building because it means the gallows and the courtyard are about to become operational. Carmen examines the bell with the clinical interest of a scientist studying a new specimen. Has that last thing happened recently? Twice since I took over, both times during anniversary weeks, the period surrounding significant dates in the prison's history. We have a protocol for it now. I call the local police and tell them we're conducting fire drills. They block off the surrounding streets, and I activate the building's supernatural containment systems. The building has supernatural containment systems. Warden Thorne was ahead of his time. He designed a conversion with certain safeguards, hidden salt lines in the walls, iron framework throughout the building, and a series of blessed mirrors that can redirect spiritual energy back into the 3rd floor when necessary. I point to what looks like decorative mirrors positioned throughout the lobby. Those aren't just for ambience. Carmen nods, as if I'm explaining the location of fire extinguishers. What about the emotionally weird category? Guest complaints. You'd be amazed how many people book a stay at a converted prison and then get upset when they encounter actual prisoners. Last week, a woman from Delaware demanded a refund because the spirit of a 1920s bank robber kept trying to give her financial advice through the bathroom mirror. She said his investment strategies were outdated and fiscally irresponsible. Was his advice actually bad? That's the thing. It wasn't. Henderson checked his numbers, and the woman would have made 30% returns following his recommendations. But she wanted a relaxing getaway, not a spectral financial planning session. The grandfather clock in the lobby chimes 10 times, marking the official start of Carmen's shift. As if summoned by the sound, our first challenge of the evening announces itself. The elevator begins moving between floors with no one inside, its mechanical hum taking on an almost musical quality. That's prisoner 7, I explain as Carmen watches the floor indicator climb steadily upward. His name was Thomas Crane, executed for murder in 1922. He's not one of the official 12, died a year before Thorne's ritual, but he's attached himself to our group anyway. He runs the elevator when he's bored or when he wants to talk to someone. The elevator reaches the 4th floor, which officially doesn't exist, and stops. A moment later, the call button at the reception desk lights up. Carmen looks at me expectantly. Do I answer it? Go ahead. He's actually one of our more reasonable residents. She picks up the phone with admirable composure. Old Jail Inn, this is Carmen. How can I assist you tonight? I can't hear Crane's side of the conversation, but I watch Carmen's expressions change from professional courtesy to genuine interest to something approaching concern. I see, she says finally. And you're certain about the timeline? Yes, I understand the urgency. We'll take care of it immediately. She hangs up and turns to me with the kind of expression emergency room doctors get when facing a particularly complex case. Thomas says there's going to be a problem with room 237 in approximately 47 minutes. Something about temporal displacement and anniversary resonance. He recommends we relocate Mr. Thompson to a different room before midnight. I feel a chill that has nothing to do with supernatural temperature drops. Did he say what kind of temporal displacement? The kind where Mr. Thompson might accidentally get pulled back to 1923 and have to live through Thorne's ritual from the assistant's perspective again. Thomas says it's happened twice before during strong anniversary resonances, and both times Thompson came back, changed. I'm already reaching for the phone to call Thompson's room, but Carmen catches my arm. There's more, she says quietly. Thomas wants to know if you've been experiencing any memory bleeds lately. Dreams or visions of things that happened before you started working here. My blood goes cold. I have been having strange dreams, vivid nightmares where I'm working the night shift during different time periods, dealing with supernatural crises in the 1940s, 1960s, 1980s. I'd assumed they were just stress-related, but now... Carmen, I say slowly, I need to ask you something that I need you to answer honestly. When you worked at the hotel in Savannah, did you ever experience anything like temporal displacement? Did you ever feel like you were living someone else's memories? She's quiet for a long moment, and when she speaks, her voice is barely above a whisper. Every night for 3 years. That's why I left. The hotel was using me as an anchor point for its previous night managers, letting their experiences bleed through to help me handle supernatural crises. By the time I quit, I had the memories of 12 different people spanning 8 decades. The pieces clicked together with horrifying clarity. Thompson had trained me, just like someone had trained him, just like someone had trained his predecessor. The old jail and doesn't just bind spirits to eternal service. It creates a continuous chain of living guardians, each one inheriting the knowledge and experiences of those who came before. How long do we usually last? I ask. Based on the memories I inherited, the average tenure for a living guardian is about 15 years. After that, the accumulated supernatural exposure becomes too much for a human mind to handle, and we transition. Into what? Carmen points toward the 3rd floor. I think you know. The brass bell on the desk begins to glow, pulsing in the familiar rhythm that means our residents need assistance. But this time, the glow is different, stronger, more urgent, and tinged with something that looks almost like hope. They're not just calling for help. Carmen says, her voice filled with sudden understanding. They're calling for rescue. Elena, what if the rules aren't meant to keep people trapped? What if they're meant to create a situation where someone with the right knowledge can finally set everyone free? I look at the bell, then at Carmen, then at the lobby that's been my prison and kingdom for the past 6 months. Somewhere above us, Thompson is in danger of being pulled back into a traumatic past. Somewhere in the walls around us, the spirits of guards and prisoners and previous wardens are trapped in an endless cycle of service and suffering. But for the first time since I learned the rules, I'm not thinking about how to follow them. I'm thinking about how to break them. Carmen, I say, reaching for the brass bell, how do you feel about completely rewriting the employee handbook? She grins, and there's something wild and determined in her expression that tells me I've finally found the right person for this job. I thought you'd never ask. The bell chimes once as I lift it, and from somewhere in the building around us comes the sound of 47 voices raised in what might be a cheer, or might be a warning, or might just be the wind. But as Carmen and I head toward the elevator to begin our rescue mission, I realize it doesn't matter what the sound means. For the first time in a century, the old jail is about to discover what happens when someone refuses to follow the rules. And I have a feeling our permanent residents are going to like the answer.